The sky above Velthera had turned the color of blood, the ancient sun, which had warmed this world for billions of years, was tearing itself apart in its death throes. Massive prominences of plasma arced across the crimson expanse, while radiation alarms screamed across every frequency. Admiral Choi Jung-ho stood on the bridge of his flagship, the UHT's Remembrance, watching the dying star through filtered view screens. Status report. He commanded, 50 million Kethvari remain on the surface. His executive officer replied, current evacuation rate is 4 million per day at this pace. We will need 12 more days. And how long until the nova? The officer hesitated before answering. Stellar models suggest somewhere between 8 and 14 days. The uncertainty is significant. Jung-ho closed his eyes for just a moment, allowing himself to feel the weight of what those numbers meant. Then he opened them and got to work. Signal all available ships. I want everything that can carry passengers diverted to Velthera. Immediately, military vessels, cargo haulers, civilian transports, everything. Admiral, some of those ships are not equipped for Kethvari. Environmental requirements. Then we modify them in transit, strip out what we do not need. Install portable atmospheric systems. Get creative. We did not come this far to lose people in the final hours. The response to his call was extraordinary, from across human space and beyond. Ships changed course for the dying world. Rethani warships, never designed for anything but combat, arrived with their weapons bays converted into emergency shelters. Morvith cargo vessels, coldly efficient in their optimization, calculated the precise number of refugees each could carry, and then found ways to exceed those calculations. Even private citizens with personal craft made the journey, offering whatever space they could spare. Soyan coordinated the surface evacuation from a command post in the last functioning city, working around the clock as radiation levels climbed and the ground shook with increasingly violent tremors. The Eastern Processing Center is at capacity, Chithel reported, their voice strained with exhaustion. We are redirecting overflow to the northern platforms. The northern platforms are experiencing structural failures. Soin countered. We need to. She stopped as a new transmission came through. This is the eldest vessel Eternal Witness. We are entering Velthera orbit with transport capacity for approximately 3 million individuals. Where you need us. Soyan stared at her communication console in disbelief. The eldest were helping directly, not just observing, but actively participating in the rescue. Eldest vessel. We have a concentration of refugees in the southern archipelago who cannot reach standard extraction points. If you can assist there, you would save countless lives. Understood. We are descending now, around her. Soyan could see the effect this moment had on everyone human, Kethvari, and the representatives of a dozen other species who had come to help the eldest, who had watched passively for millions of years, had finally chosen to act. Something fundamental had changed in the galaxy, and everyone present could feel it. The matriarch was the last Kethvari to board an evacuation vessel. She had insisted on remaining until every one of her people was safely away. Despite her advisor's desperate pleas and her own ancient body's fragility, Admiral Jung-ho went to collect her personally. Matriarch, he said, extending a hand to help her to her feet. It is time. Your people need you on Velthera Reborn. She looked up at him with compound eyes that had seen empires rise and fall across 1,000 years. Why did you stay? She asked. Your ship's radiation shielding is failing. You should have withdrawn hours ago. Jung-ho smiled gently. Because you were still here, and because when your people saved that human colony ship 2 centuries ago, they did not leave until the last survivor was aboard. He helped her stand, supporting her weight as they walked toward the shuttle. We are not as different as we appear. Matriarch, we both understand that some things are more important than our own survival. The shuttle lifted off from Velthera's surface for the Last time as the sun began its final collapse, Jung-ho watched from the viewport as the world that had given birth to one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations began to break apart. Its oceans boiling away, its crystalline cities shattering under the force of stellar death beside him. The matriarch wept a keening cry of her people. "A billion years of history," she whispered. "Everything we were, everything we built on." "Not everything," Jung-ho said softly. "Your people survive, your culture survives. The best of what you were will continue on a new world." He put a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of comfort that transcended the boundaries between species. "And your story will be remembered, not as the civilization that died with its sun, but as the people who saved strangers in the dark and were saved in return." The Nova came 3 hours after the last evacuation ship cleared the danger zone. Velthera's sun exploded with a fury that lit up the entire sector. A brilliant flash of destruction that consumed everything in its path. 900 million Kethvari watched from the viewports of their ships as their ancestral home became a cloud of expanding plasma and scattered debris. But they were alive. They were all alive 1 year later. The matriarch stood at the center of Velthera Reborn's first completed city. Around her, crystalline towers rose toward a new sky, their surfaces singing with the harmonics of Kethvari consciousness. Millions of her people had already settled into this world that humans and others had crafted for them, and millions more would follow as construction continued. But today was not about the future, it was about remembering. A great monument had been erected at the heart of the city. Visible from every quarter and designed to last for millennia, it depicted 2 hands reaching toward each other, one human, one Kethvari frozen in the moment, just before they touched. The inscription at its base was written in both languages. "Kindness given freely returns transformed in memory of all who reached across the dark." Ambassador Park Do-yeon, now retired from diplomatic service, but invited to this ceremony as an honored guest, stood beside the matriarch as she prepared to speak. "I never properly thanked you," she said quietly. "You were the first to stand for us when no one else would. Without you, none of this would have happened." Do-yeon shook his head. "I only reminded humanity of what we owed. It was their choice to repay that debt. I simply spoke the words. Words have power," the matriarch replied. "They can move hearts and change fates. Never underestimate what you accomplished by speaking when others stayed silent." She stepped forward to address the assembled crowd, Kethvari and human, Rithani and Morvith, Desari and others, all gathered together in a way that would have seemed impossible just a decade before. "We gather today to remember," the matriarch began. "To remember a world we have lost and a gift we have received, but also to look forward to what we will become." She gestured to the monument behind her. "This statue represents more than gratitude, it represents a promise. Never again will the Kethvari stand apart from the galaxy. Never again will we believe that isolation brings safety." Her voice grew stronger. "We have learned from humanity that the universe is not cold and uncaring. It is what we make it, and we choose to make it a place where no species faces extinction alone." She turned to face the human delegation directly. 200 years ago, our ancestors saved 50,000 humans because we cannot bear to let hope die in the darkness. We asked for nothing in return, expected nothing, and forgot the deed almost as soon as it was done. Her compound eyes glistened with emotion. "We were wrong to forget humanity remembered. And in remembering, they taught the entire galaxy a lesson that will echo through the ages." She raised her voice for all to hear. "Today, the Kethvari join with the united human, territories and all willing species to establish the Compact of Remembrance, a sacred agreement. That kindness will be recorded and repaid. That no call for help will go unanswered. That the bonds between peoples will be stronger than the void between stars. The crowd erupted in applause and clicking approval sounds that mixed together in a symphony of unity. Far above, the eldest vessel that had helped with the final evacuation remained in orbit, watching. When their representative was later asked what they had learned from witnessing these events, they gave an answer that would be quoted for centuries to come. We have watched the younger species for eons, waiting to see if any would prove worthy of joining the community of eternal minds. We now believe we have been asking the wrong question. The eldest paused, their ancient form shifting with something that might have been wonder. It is not whether they are worthy of us, it is whether we have been worthy of them. The humans have reminded us what we forgot in our long watching, that the measure of civilization is not power or knowledge or longevity, but what we do for those who cannot repay us. The representative fell silent for a moment. We have much to learn from these brief, bright beings, and much to atone for in our ages of mere observation. The galaxy is changing, and for the first time in millions of years, we believe it is changing for the better on Velthra Reborn. As the celebration continued and beings from across the galaxy mingled and laughed and wept together, a young Kethvari child approached Soin. "Is it true that your people came from far away to save us?" The child asked. Soin knelt down to meet the child's eyes. The moon that humans had named Velthra Reborn hung in the black sky like a jewel being slowly polished into brilliance 5 years into the terraforming project. The barren rock had begun its transformation into something that could sustain life. Atmospheric processors the size of cities pumped carefully balanced gases into the thin air, while deep core heating systems warmed the frozen interior. Coordinator Han Mi-Ray stood at the observation window of the orbital station, watching automated mining platforms extract the crystalline minerals that would eventually form the foundation of Kethvari cities. "The latest surveys show we are ahead of schedule," her assistant reported. "Crystal growth in the northern hemisphere is exceeding projections by 12%. And the southern resonance chambers?" Mi-Ray asked. The engineers had to redesign the harmonic amplifiers 3 times. But the test results are promising. The Kethvari consultants believe their people will be able to maintain collective consciousness across distances of up to 2,000 kilometers. Mi-Ray nodded slowly. "Good. That is good. What about the bad news you are clearly hesitant to share?" Her assistant winced. "The latest stellar analysis from Velthra, the decay is accelerating again. Current estimates suggest we may have as few as 5 years remaining before the nova. 5 years to finish a project that had been planned for 30. Mi-Ray closed her eyes and let the weight of that number settle over her. "Inform all department heads, we are moving to emergency protocols. I want every non-essential project suspended and all resources redirected to the terraforming coordinator. Some of those projects are—" "I know what they are," Mi-Ray interrupted. "And I know what we are trying to accomplish 5 years from now. Either this moon will be ready to receive 900 million refugees, or those refugees will have nowhere to go. Nothing else matters." Word of the accelerated timeline spread quickly across the galaxy on the Rethani homeworld, a species known for their warrior traditions and their skepticism of other races. War Master Korath convened her senior commanders. "The humans are attempting the impossible," she said, studying reports that detailed the massive engineering effort underway at Tau Ceti. "They throw everything they have into this project to save a species that is not their own. Foolishness," one commander growled. "They weaken themselves for no strategic gain." "Perhaps," Korath replied. "Or perhaps they understand something we do not." She made a decision that surprised even herself. Send a delegation to observe. I want to understand what drives these humans if they succeed. It will change everything. If they fail, we should at least witness what they attempted. Similar conversations were happening across dozens of worlds. The calculating Morvith who measured all things in terms of efficiency and resource optimization, found themselves unable to categorize human behavior according to their usual models. Their actions do not compute. The Morvis Central Intelligence reported to its governing council. They expend resources far beyond any reasonable return on investment. Yet they persist. We find this concerning and fascinating in equal measure. After lengthy deliberation, the Morvith made an unprecedented offer. They would contribute a fleet of automated construction vessels to the terraforming effort. Consider it an experiment, their representative explained. We wish to understand the variables that drive human decision-making. Direct observation seems the most efficient method. Even the eldest, those ancient beings who had watched younger species rise and fall for millions of years, broke their customary silence. A single eldest arrived at the Tau Ceti construction site without announcement, their form shifting and indistinct in ways that defied human perception. "We have come to witness," the eldest said when questioned about their presence. "This moment may prove significant. We would not miss it." On the surface of the transforming moon, human and Kethvari engineers worked side by side in conditions that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. Soyen, now promoted to senior liaison engineer, led a mixed team through the newly formed crystalline caverns that would eventually house millions of Kethvari refugees. "The resonance frequencies are stabilizing," Chithel reported, their antennae quivering with cautious optimism. "My people could live here. They could think here. It feels almost like home." "Almost?" Soyen asked. "The harmonic structure is different. It will take generations for the crystals to develop the complexity of our original world. But it is enough. It is more than enough." They emerged from the caverns onto a plateau that overlooked a vast plain where construction crews were laying the foundations for the first Kethvari city. "Tell me honestly," Soyen said, "did you ever think this was possible?" Chithel was quiet for a long moment. "When I first came to work with the human teams, I believed your species was admirable, but ultimately limited. I thought your ambition exceeded your ability. I was prepared to witness a noble failure." The dreamer turned to face Soyen directly. "I was wrong. Your species does not understand limits the way we do. You see obstacles as challenges rather than boundaries. It is terrifying and magnificent." A Rithani observer who had been following their progress made a sound of reluctant agreement. "We Rithani pride ourselves on our courage in battle," Commander Vethra said. "But I have never seen anything like this. You humans fight against reality itself and somehow make it yield." "We had help," Soyen pointed out. "The Morvith construction fleet increased our capacity by 30%. Your own warriors have assisted with heavy lifting. The eldest provide guidance in ways I do not fully understand." "Yes," Vethros acknowledged, "but only because you inspired us to offer. Only because you showed us what was possible." He gestured toward the construction site below, where beings from a dozen different species work together in unprecedented cooperation. "This is what you have accomplished beyond the terraforming," he said. "You have made us believe that such things can be done, and once we believed, we found ourselves unable to simply watch." In the Galactic Council chambers, the mood had shifted dramatically from the day when the Kethvari had first begged for help. Ambassador Park Dohyun, older now and weary from years of diplomatic struggle, addressed an assembly that listened with respect rather than dismissal. "The project proceeds well," he reported. "The Lithara Reborn will be ready to receive refugees within the next 3 years. The first wave of evacuation transports is already being loaded." "What is the current status of the Kethvari population?" a Lizari delegate asked. "Approximately 850 million. Remain on Velthara. The solar flares have taken their toll, but the evacuation infrastructure has prevented the losses from being catastrophic." He paused, looking around the chamber at faces that had once turned away from those in need. "I would like to acknowledge the contributions of our allies," he continued. "The Morvith, the Rethani, the Thesari who joined us in recent months, and all others who chose to help rather than simply observe. He smiled slightly. History will remember this moment. It will remember that when faced with the possible extinction of an ancient civilization, the galaxy chose compassion over convenience. The eldest representative, who had never spoken in the council chambers during living memory, rose from their seat. The assembly fell silent, aware that something unprecedented was occurring. "We have watched your younger species for eons," the eldest said, their voice like wind through ancient trees. "We have seen empires rise and fall, wars consume entire star systems. Civilizations destroy themselves through greed and fear." They paused, their strange eyes seeming to look into dimensions that others could not perceive. "But we have never seen this. We have never seen such. Different beings choose to sacrifice for strangers. We have never seen hope burn so brightly against the dark." The eldest turned to address Do-hyun directly. "Your humans have reminded us of something we had forgotten in our long watching, that the universe changes not through power alone, but through the choices made by those who refuse to accept cruelty as inevitable." They sat down, and the chamber remained silent for a long moment. No one quite knew how to respond to praise from beings who had existed since before most species had learned to speak. But in that silence, something crystallized an understanding that what was happening at Tau Ceti was not just an evacuation project, but a turning point in galactic history, a moment when the species of the galaxy looked at what humanity had inspired and found themselves wanting to be better outside the chamber windows. The stars continued their ancient dance, but they seemed somehow different now, brighter, perhaps full of possibility rather than cold indifference. The race against the dying sun continued, but for the first time, it felt like a race that could actually be won. The surface of Velthera had once been beautiful in ways that human eyes could barely comprehend. Crystalline forests stretched toward a golden sky, their branches catching light and scattering it into rainbows that danced across the landscape. Cities of living stone rose from valleys where rivers of liquid methane flowed between banks of precious minerals. Now the sky had turned from gold to angry orange, and the crystals sang with frequencies of distress that only Kethvari could hear. Engineer Beak Soin stepped off the landing shuttle into air so cold it would have killed her in seconds. Without her environmental suit, she was 28 years old and had volunteered for this assignment against the advice of everyone who cared about her. "The atmospheric readings are stable," her suit announced in its calm mechanical voice. "Temperature is -112 degrees. Recommend limited exposure." Soyen ignored the warning and walked toward the group of Kethvari, waiting to receive the human engineering team. The aliens were taller than she had expected, their segmented bodies covered in exoskeletons that shimmered like pearl in the strange light. Their compound eyes tracked her movement with an intensity that might have been frightening if she had not spent months studying their culture. "I am Engineer Beak Soyen," she said, her words translated by her suit's systems. "I am here to help design evacuation vessels that can sustain your people during the journey." The lead, Kethvari, whose name was Architect Vethros, made a gesture of greeting that Soyen had learned meant cautious welcome. "We have prepared workspace in the northern design hall," Vethros said. "Your environmental needs have been accommodated as best we could manage." What followed were the most difficult and rewarding months of Soyen's life. Working with the Kethvari was challenging in ways she had never anticipated. Their minds operated collectively, sharing thoughts and impressions through the crystalline resonance network that connected their entire species. When Soyen proposed a design change, she was not arguing with one engineer, but with dozens who shared the same mental space. The atmospheric processors you suggest are inefficient, Vethros explained during one particularly frustrating session. We have reviewed the specifications through 17 different analytical perspectives and found them lacking. 17 perspectives arrived at the same conclusion? Soyan asked. We are Kethvari. We think together. Soyan ran her hands through her hair, a habit she had when stressed. But that is exactly the problem, she said. Your collective analysis assumes baseline conditions. What happens when something unexpected occurs? What happens when a processor fails in a way none of your 17 perspectives predicted? Vethros was silent, and Soin realized that silence meant the question was being considered by far more minds than the one standing before her. We do not understand, Vethros finally said. How can you plan for what cannot be predicted? That is what humans do, Soin replied. We expect things to go wrong. We build in redundancies and backups in emergency systems, because we know that the universe does not care about our plans. It was during these conversations that Soin first met dreamer Chifel, unlike most Kethvari, who focused on practical matters of science and engineering. Dreamers were those whose minds were attuned to emotional resonances. They felt what others felt, sensed the currents of consciousness that flowed through all thinking beings. Chifel approached Soin one evening as she sat alone in the modified workspace that served as her quarters, staring at design documents that refused to cooperate. You are troubled, Chifel said. I can feel your frustration like heat from a star. Soin looked up, surprised by the intrusion. I did not know Kethvari could sense human emotions. Most cannot, Chifel admitted. But I am trained to feel across the boundaries of species. It is why I was assigned to work with your team. The dreamer settled into a resting position nearby, their crystalline eyes catching the artificial light. Your emotions are very loud, Chifel continued. All human emotions are. You feel things with an intensity that is almost painful to perceive. Is that why the Kethvari saved our colony ship? Soyan asked, because you could feel our fear? Chifel's antennae moved in. What Soyan had learned was a sign of deep consideration. The dreamers of that era sensed 50,000 minds crying out in terror, Chifel said. They felt children afraid of the dark, parents desperate to protect their young, elders making peace with death. The collective weight of so much raw emotion was overwhelming. The dreamer paused. Our people are not without feeling, but we experience things together, shared and diluted across many minds. Your species carries every emotion alone, bearing the full weight with no one to share the burden. That sounds like pity, Soin said quietly. It is admiration, Chifel corrected. How do you survive it? How do you function when every joy and every sorrow is experienced at full intensity with no relief? Soyan thought about the question seriously. I suppose we do not know any other way, she said. We just keep going. We endure because the alternative is giving up. And humans are not very good at giving up. The ground shook. Before Chifel could respond, alarms began wailing across the city as the sky turned from orange to violent red. Solar flare, Chifel said, their voice tight with fear. A large one, the southern continent. What followed was chaos. The flare had struck the southern hemisphere with devastating force, overwhelming the planetary shields that had protected Velthuras. Cities for millennia, millions of Kethvari were suddenly in danger as temperatures spiked and crystalline structures began to crack under the thermal stress. Admiral Jung-ho received the emergency transmission aboard his command ship. We have massive casualties incoming, the Kethvari emergency coordinator reported. Our evacuation capacity is insufficient. We need help. Jung-ho did not hesitate. All ships capable of atmospheric operation, prepare for emergency descent, he ordered. We are going down there, Admiral, his executive officer warned. Our ships are not designed for this, the radiation levels alone. I am aware of the risks, Jung-ho interrupted. And I am telling you that we are not going to sit up here and watch people die when we can help. 17 human ships descended into hell. The radiation alarms screamed constantly, and hull temperatures rose to dangerous levels. But the crews did not turn back. They landed in burning cities and loaded terrified HFY into cargo holds that had been hastily converted for alien biology. Soyeon joined the rescue effort, working alongside Chithul to guide refugees to safety. There are still people trapped in the Eastern District, Chithul reported, their voice strained with the effort of filtering so many terrified minds. Then we go to the Eastern District, Soyeon replied. They found survivors huddled in a damaged resonance chamber, cut off from the collective consciousness of their people and nearly mad with isolation. Soyeon carried them one by one to the waiting shuttle while Chithul provided what comfort they could through direct mental contact. When the last survivor was aboard, Soyeon looked back at the burning city one final time. Why are you doing this? A young HFY asked her. Your ships are dying. Your people are dying. Why do you not leave us? Soyeon thought of her grandmother's stories about the cold dark between stars and the alien hands that had reached out to help. Because someone did it for us once, she said. And we promised ourselves we would never forget what that meant. The evacuation succeeded, but the cost was high. 17 human ships had descended into the crisis zone. 12 returned. 5 remained on the scorched surface of Vultura's southern continent. Their crews lost to radiation and fire. Admiral Jung-ho attended the memorial service in person, standing before images of the fallen with a heaviness in his chest that would never fully fade. The HFY matriarch sent a message that was played for all to hear. We cannot express what your sacrifice means to us, she said. We ask ourselves why humans would die for those not of their kind, and we find no answer that our logic can accept. Admiral Jung-ho stepped forward to respond. Then perhaps your logic needs to expand, he said gently. We did it because your lives matter, not because you are useful or profitable or strategically important, but simply because you are people who deserve to survive. He paused, his voice thick with grief. The crews we lost today would tell you the same thing. If they could, this is who we are. This is who we choose to be. In the silence that followed, something changed across the galaxy. Word spread of what the humans had done, not just the grand promises and the ambitious projects, but the ships that had burned and the lives that had been given. And slowly, other species began to wonder if perhaps they had been wrong about these strange beings from a small blue world. Perhaps there was something to learn from creatures who would die for strangers simply because it was the right thing to do. The orbital shipyards above Earth hummed with activity that had not been seen since the great expansion wars of the previous century. Thousands of workers moved through the massive construction, platforms like blood cells through arteries, each one carrying purpose in their steps and determination in their hearts. At the center of this controlled chaos stood project coordinator Han Mai-rae, a woman of 43 years whose reputation for achieving impossible things had made her the obvious choice to lead humanity's most ambitious undertaking. She stood before a holographic display that showed the scope of what they faced, and even she felt her confidence waver at the numbers. 900 million HFY, she said to the assembled team of engineers, scientists, and military planners, each requiring an atmosphere with precise chemical composition, temperatures that would freeze human blood, and crystalline resonance chambers to maintain their collective consciousness. She gestured, and the display changed to show a timeline. We have 30 years, possibly less if the stellar decay accelerates, to build enough ships to transport them all and find a world where they can survive. Chief Engineer Kwon Taeson raised his hand. With our current shipbuilding capacity, we could construct enough vessels for the transport in approximately 80 years. he said. To do it in 30 would require us to more than double our output while simultaneously developing entirely new environmental systems. Then we double our output and develop new systems. Myray replied simply, "That is not physically possible," Tayson argued. "The mathematics simply do not support." "The mathematics said it was impossible for the Kethvari to reach our colony ship 2 centuries ago," Myray interrupted. "They did it anyway, because they decided that math was less important than lives." The room fell silent. Admiral Choi Jung-ho, the weathered commander assigned to lead the evacuation fleet, spoke next. "Even if we build the ships, where do we take them? There is no known world that meets Kethvari biological requirements within reasonable transport distance." Myray allowed herself a small smile. "Then we make one." She brought up a new display showing a barren moon orbiting a gas giant in the Tau Ceti system, designated TC7. "Currently an airless rock with a frozen core," she said. "But preliminary surveys suggest it has the right mineral composition for Kethvari crystalline structures. And its position relative to the gas giant creates stable temperature conditions." "You want to terraform an entire moon?" Tayson asked, his voice rising with disbelief. "I want to give 900 million people a home," Murray corrected. "Terraforming is just a method." The council chamber on Earth's surface was less enthusiastic about the plan. Senator Yu Jinwoo led the opposition, his face red with barely contained frustration as he addressed the assembly. "We are being asked to bankrupt humanity for the sake of alien insects," he declared. "Insects who, I might add, have never lifted a claw to help us in any conflict or crisis since that single rescue mission 2 centuries ago. A single rescue mission that saved 50,000 human lives." Ambassador Do-yoon reminded him, "And for that we should sacrifice our own future?" Jinwoo demanded. "The resources required for this project could build 100 new colony ships. Ships that could carry humans to new worlds. Expand human territory. Secure human prosperity." Murmurs of agreement rippled through a portion of the assembly. Do-yoon rose to respond. "Senator Yu speaks of resources as if they were the only measure of worth," he said. "But I ask you, what is humanity worth if we abandon those who saved us simply because it is expensive to help them?" "This is not about abandonment," Jinwoo countered. "Other species can contribute. The Galactic Council can share the burden. Why must we carry it alone?" "Because no one else will," Do-yoon answered. "We saw that in the council chamber when the Kethvari asked for help. They received only excuses and calculations. Only humanity answered." He paused, looking around at his fellow representatives. "That is what makes us different," he continued. "That is what makes us better, not our technology or our military might, but our willingness to do what is right, even when it is hard." The vote was closer than Do-yoon had hoped. But in the end, the motion to proceed with Project Velthora Reborn passed by a margin of 17 votes above the planet. Work began in earnest. Ships that had been designed for war were refitted for rescue. Cargo vessels had their holds converted into environmental chambers that could sustain Kethvari life, and on drafting tables across the solar system, engineers worked on designs that had never been attempted before. Admiral Jung-ho visited the shipyards personally. Walking among the workers who would build the fleet he would command, he stopped beside a young technician who was calibrating an atmospheric processor. "Do you know what we are doing here?" he asked the technician. A woman barely out of her training looked up with tired but determined eyes. "We are saving people." "Admiral," Jung-ho nodded slowly. "Remember that when the work gets hard," he said. "Remember that every bolt you fasten, every wire you connect, is one more life that will survive because of what you do here." He moved on, leaving the technician to return to her work with renewed purpose 3 months after the vote. The first wave of terraforming ships launched for Tau Ceti. Myray watched them go from the observation deck of the main shipyard. her reflection ghostly in the viewport glass. "Some people are calling us fools," Tayson said, joining her at the window. "Some people always call pioneers fools," Myray replied. "Usually the same people who later claim they supported the idea all along." Tayson managed a tired laugh. "Do you really think we can do this?" he asked, truthfully, without the speeches and the motivation. "Do you believe it is possible?" Myray was quiet for a long moment. "I believe that we have to try," she finally said. "I believe that if we fail, it will not be because the task was impossible, but because we did not give everything we had." She turned to face him. "And I believe that humanity has never failed when we truly committed ourselves to something greater than our own comfort." Far away, on the dying world of Velthera, the Kethvari watched the stars with new eyes. Word had spread across their planet that help was coming, that the humans were building ships and transforming a world for them, and for the first time in decades. There was hope in the crystalline cities. The matriarch addressed her people through the resonance network that connected all Kethvari minds. "We face the end of our world," she said, "but not the end of our people. The humans have shown us that the universe is not as cold and uncaring as we believed." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "When we saved their colony ship 2 centuries ago, we did not expect thanks or repayment. We did it because it was right. And now we learn that such actions are never truly forgotten." Her words resonated through millions of minds, spreading comfort and courage to those who had begun to despair. "We will survive," the matriarch declared. "And when we do, we will remember this lesson: kindness is not weakness, and compassion is not foolishness. These are the things that bind civilizations together across the void." On a small monitoring station at the edge of the Velthera system, Kethvari astronomers watched their dying sun with instruments that measured every fluctuation and flare. The readings they recorded that night were troubling. The stellar decay was accelerating faster than any model had predicted. The lead astronomer stared at the data for a long time before composing her report. "Our sun is dying faster than we thought," she wrote. "We may not have 30 years, we may not have 20. The humans must be told that their impossible task has just become more impossible still." She sent the message and then returned to her instruments, watching the star that had warmed her people for millions of years slowly tear itself apart. The race against death had begun, and time was already slipping away. The great chamber of the Galactic Council fell silent as the Kethvari ambassador rose from her crystalline seat. Researcher Yinsel was ancient, even by her species' standards. Her exoskeleton faded to pale silver, her compound eyes clouded with age but still sharp with intelligence. She had traveled across the stars for this moment, carrying the weight of 900 million souls on her thin shoulders. "Honored representatives of the Council," she began, her translator device converting the clicking sounds of her native tongue into words all could understand. "I come before you not with demands or threats, but with a simple truth that I wish were a lie." She activated the holographic display at the center of the chamber. A yellow star appeared, its surface rippling with violent eruptions of plasma and fire. "Our sun is dying," Yinsel continued. "Our scientists have confirmed what we long feared. Within 30 years, perhaps less, it will expand and consume our world before collapsing into itself." Murmurs spread through the assembled delegates like wind through tall grass. The Kethvari homeworld of Velthera was known too, all an ancient civilization that had mapped the stars when most species were still learning to make fire. "We request the Council's assistance in relocating our people," Yinsel said. "We have resources to contribute to this effort, but we cannot accomplish it alone." The Morvith delegate, a being of pure calculation and cold logic, spoke first. "The mathematics of such an evacuation are challenging," it said in its flat, mechanical voice. 900 million individuals, requiring specialized atmospheric conditions and crystalline resonance chambers for your collective consciousness. The cost would drain the resources of a dozen worlds. And to what end? The Rithani warrior delegate growled, his scales bristling with poorly hidden contempt. The Kethvari have kept to themselves for millennia. They share nothing of their knowledge, contribute nothing to galactic affairs. Why should we bankrupt ourselves for isolationists? Yinsul lowered her head, unable to argue against truths that stung because they were accurate. Her people had indeed withdrawn from galactic society, content in their ancient ways, believing they needed no one. Now that belief would cost them everything, one by one. The other delegates offered excuses dressed as reason. The Dazari could not spare the ships. The Vorn had their own crises to manage, the eldest. Those mysterious beings who watched but rarely acted remained silent as always. Hope drained from the chamber like water from a cracked vessel. Then a human stood up. Ambassador Park Do-yun was unremarkable by the standards of his dramatic species' average height. Dark hair streaked with gray, a face that had seen 60 years of life and showed every one of them. But when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made the entire chamber turn toward him. 207 years ago, Do-yun began, a human colony ship called the Bright Tomorrow suffered a catastrophic engine failure in the void between stars. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably, wondering where this was going. 50,000 humans, men, women, and children drifted in the darkness with no hope of rescue. Do-yun continued. They were too far from any human territory, and no other species had reason to help the newcomers who had only just learned to travel between stars. He paused, letting the silence build, but someone did come. Yinsul's compound eyes widened as ancient memories stirred within her. The Kethvari detected our distress signal, Daihan said. They diverted an entire fleet from their patrol route ships they could not spare, resources they could not afford, and they crossed 3 sectors to reach our people. He turned to face Yinsul directly. They asked for nothing, in return no payment. No alliance, no debt acknowledged. They simply said that letting innocents die in the cold dark was not something their conscience could permit. The chamber had gone completely still. I know this story because my grandmother was on that ship, Do-yun said, his voice thick with emotion. She was 7 years old, terrified and hungry, when a Kethvari rescue worker wrapped her in a thermal blanket and told her that everything would be fine. He straightened his shoulders and addressed the full. He straightened his shoulders and addressed his shoulders and addressed the folders and addressed the full. Council, the United Human Territories will lead the evacuation of Velthra, he declared. We will commit whatever ships, resources, and personnel are required, and we will do so not because we expect repayment, but because we remember what it means to be saved by strangers who owed us nothing. The Rithani delegate sputtered in disbelief. This is madness, he said. Your species barely has the infrastructure to support your own expansion. You cannot possibly. We will find a way. Do-hyun interrupted. We always do. He looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives of 100 worlds. Any who wish to join us in this effort are welcome, he said. Those who do not can watch and remember what they chose when history judges this moment. Without waiting for a response, he sat down. The session dissolved into chaos as delegates argued and shouted over one another. But Do-yun paid them no attention. He was watching Yinsul, who had not moved from where she stood after what felt like an eternity. The ancient Kethvari ambassador crossed the chamber to where the human delegation sat. Why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It had been 2 centuries. No one remembers such things. Do-yun smiled softly. Humans remember, he said. We write it in our histories and teach it to our children. Kindness is never forgotten. Not by us. Yinsul trembled, overwhelmed by emotions her species rarely expressed. I must inform the matriarch, she said. She will not believe this. None of us will believe this. Tell her that humanity pays its debts, Dohyun replied, and that this debt has gathered interest on the distant world of Volthera. Beneath a dying sun that painted the crystalline towers in shades of orange and red, the matriarch received the transmission in her private chamber. She was the oldest living Kethvari, her memories stretching back nearly 1,000 years. And she had witnessed the slow decline of her people with the resignation of one who has seen too much. When the message finished playing, she sat in perfect stillness for a long time. Then, for the first time in 700 years, the matriarch wept not tears as humans knew them, but a keening sound that resonated through the crystalline structures of the palace. A sound of grief and hope, and something she had almost forgotten existed. Her attendants rushed to her side. Frightened by this display from one who had always been unshakable matriarch, her closest advisor asked, "What troubles you? What news could cause such distress?" The ancient leader raised her head, and her clouded eyes seemed to glow with new light. "Not distress," she said. "The humans are coming. They remember what we did, and they are coming to save us." Her advisor could not understand. "But that was so long ago," she said. "Surely no species holds to such old obligations." The matriarch made a sound that might have been laughter. "That is what we thought," she said. "That is what everyone thought, but we were wrong about them, as we have been wrong about so many things." She rose from her seat with difficulty, her ancient limbs protesting the movement. "Summon the High Council," she commanded. "We have much to prepare. Our world is ending, but our people will live." Outside the palace windows, the sun continued its slow death, but for the first time in years, the Kethvari looked upon it without despair. Help was coming from across the stars, carried by a species that refused to forget, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be quite the same.